the American engineers, and the Soviet T-34-85 tank. What we learned from a captured machine. First things first, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Your thoughts matter. Tell me what surprised you most in this story. The armor quality, the American criticism, or the economic side of things. Let's dive in. A tank, a war, and a big surprise. In the middle of the 20th century, one captured tank told an incredible story. During the Korean War, the United States forces got their hands on a Soviet-made T-34-85. It wasn't just a hunk of steel, it was a window into Soviet engineering, industry, and strategy. Back in January of 1944, the Red Army officially adopted the T-34-85. But for years, this machine was a mystery to America and its allies. During World War II, the Soviets had sent the United States earlier versions of their tanks, like the original T-34 and the KV-1, for study. But by the end of the war, the T-34 had already evolved into something very different. By 1951, America still had never laid eyes on the improved T-34-85 until the Korean conflict changed that. How did America get one? When war broke out on the Korean Peninsula in 1950, the North was backed by the Soviet Union and other socialist countries. The South was backed by the United States and its allies in the Western Bloc. Naturally, the Soviets supplied the North Koreans with weapons and training, including whole tank units built on the T-34-85. In the chaos of battle, both sides captured enemy equipment. The Soviets got their hands on some Western gear. The Americans, in turn, captured a Soviet T-34-85 at the end of 1950. By March of 1951, that tank, along with its V2 diesel engine, was shipped across the Pacific to the United States. The tank was incomplete. No tracks, just 6 spare links, dead batteries, missing guns, no radio, no optics. Engineers guessed it had been built in late 1945, while the engine was stamped as 1948. The U.S. Army gave it a code name, G812. What American engineers found? In September of 1951, U.S. engineers published a massive report titled Engineering Analysis of the Russian T-34-85. The document was more than 462 pages long. Here's what they learned in plain language. The positives. Reliability. Compared with the early T-34 America had seen back in 1942, this newer model was much more reliable. The Soviets had clearly worked out many bugs. Materials and armor. American testers were shocked. The armor had higher toughness and hardness than what the U.S. military required for its own tanks. Soviet metallurgy, especially the heat treating of steel, impressed them. Ease of maintenance. Access to the engine and batteries was simple, so even average crews could handle repairs. Instruction plates were placed all around the vehicle to guide soldiers. Diesel engine. Unlike gasoline engines used in many American tanks, the diesel reduced fire risk and gave better fuel economy in some conditions. Mobility. The tank was lighter than American mediums, but carried a gun almost the same size, 85 millimeters versus 90. Its low ground pressure made it excellent for muddy or soft terrain. The negatives. Hard to drive. The steering system used friction clutches rather than a modern planetary gearbox, making the tank physically exhausting to handle. Noise and vibration. A rigidly mounted engine, no mufflers and solid metal tracks created heavy noise and shaking, tiring the crew. Crew safety and comfort. No turret basket, limited exhaust removal, no auxiliary power unit for charging batteries, and only basic fire extinguishers. The cramped design meant higher injury risk. Air and cooling systems. Americans nicknamed the air filter tractor style. It seemed too weak for dusty or hot climates. Cooling had improved since earlier T-34s, but still wasn't good enough for desert or tropical conditions. Small design flaws. For example, removing the engine caused oil to spill inside because there were no shut-off valves. Things like that signaled less attention to ergonomics. The big surprise, Soviet armor. The single biggest revelation was the armor. American engineers tested its toughness and hardness and found it could outperform U.S. armor in many ways. This wasn't just battlefield strength. It was proof that Soviet metallurgy and manufacturing techniques had advanced dramatically. Sure, they found some weak spots like softer lower plates, but the overall impression was clear. Soviet industry could mass-produce high-quality armor plate that rivaled and sometimes exceeded U.S. standards. What about cost? Here's where it gets even more interesting. American engineers estimated the cost of a T-34-85 at more than $50,000 US. For comparison, an American Sherman tank cost anywhere between $44,000 and $64,000 depending on the year and version. In other words, the Soviets were building machines in the same economic ballpark as the Americans. But here's the twist. Soviet strategy wasn't to build fancier tanks. It was to build enough tanks. Their production system emphasized mass output, good enough design, and simplicity in manufacturing. They were willing to sacrifice crew comfort and certain refinements to keep cost and complexity low, while still turning out machines that could fight toe-to-toe with the West. That economic model, quantity plus ruggedness, was a war-winning formula. Industrial insights. American inspectors noticed something else. There was no need for ultra-advanced machine tools to build this tank. Most parts could be produced on ordinary equipment. That meant the Soviets could shift production quickly, spread it across multiple factories, and scale up output during wartime. That is exactly why so many T-34s rolled out of Soviet plants during World War II. So what did it all mean? By the early 1950s, the T-34-85 was no longer cutting edge. The Soviets were already deploying newer tanks. But to U.S. strategists, this capture machine was still a huge deal. It proved that the Soviet Union had the industrial know-how, the engineers, and the manufacturing systems to design, improve, and mass-produce competitive tanks. The T-34-85 wasn't just a battlefield weapon. It was a symbol of a nation's ability to industrialize war. And that scared the Pentagon as much as the armor thickness itself. Think about it. This wasn't just about steel. It was about strategy, economics, and industrial design. The Soviets built a tank that wasn't the most comfortable or the most high-tech, but it was tough, effective, and cheap enough to build in massive numbers. That's a lesson that still resonates today. Sometimes, in both war and business, scale and reliability beat luxury and perfection. So the captured T-34-85, codenamed 812, told American engineers something critical. The Soviet Union could build solid tanks in big numbers with surprisingly advanced metallurgy. And even if that one tank was already outdated by 1951, the industrial story behind it was far more important. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe right now and leave a comment below. What shocked you most? The toughness of the armor, the design flaws, or the cost comparison with U.S. tanks? Your engagement helps keep stories like this alive, and I've got plenty more Cold War and military tech deep dives coming your way.